Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down, as always, with co-host Mr. Keith Myers. We're here to talk Seahawks football. We've got a show that we usually push back until right before the final cut downs after training camp and after the third preseason game. We're doing our 53-man roster prediction show a little early this year because I think that we've talked about how this roster construction is happening for a long period of time. And this year it's particularly interesting with a couple of not a new position group at the quarterback, but we're going to keep three, obviously. And then a fullback added to the roster. It kind of changes the way that these things kind of come together. I think that'll be evident today when we discuss that. Welcome in, Keith. Good show today.
Yeah. The other thing is that because the depth at some of the defensive positions is so poor, it became really hard to choose a practice squad level guy over a legit player at another position. And you ended up, as we were talking just before we hit record, with a big imbalance between offense and defense. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, I was going to actually talk about that at the end after we went through this exercise, because I was going to have an imbalance. I've got 27 players chosen on the offensive side of the board and 23 on the defense. And it actually, this exercise opened my eyes to the idea that we're really pretty good on offense. I mean, we've got some really good depth all across the board. And I think that's evident in the way that I kind of projected my roster. Now, we're going to have a discussion at the end about where the bubbles are, where the pressure points and pain points are on the roster as far as how we came to those sorts of those selections. And you kind of balanced your roster.
It was not easy this year.
But you had to really work hard at it. And for me, I just kind of wanted to do the naturally, which is how I would do it. And I did the offense first, and it just is what it is. It came out at 27 and without trying to work it too hard to get it down. And then that left me with 23 on the defense, which was also natural because I wasn't trying to pull a bunch of guys up that didn't really deserve to be there. And so I thought, well, at the end, our roster is on the defensive side is not as deep as you'd want it to be. And a couple of those are injury related. With Nwoso, I've got starting the year on the injury list, and then Riley Mills as well is a player that would naturally be up there. So let's go through this thing, and then we'll have that conversation in a little bit more depth, I think, after we kind of go through it. So obviously, I think the first two position groups for me are pretty easy. Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, and Jalen Milroe all make the 53. You can't expose any one of those to a practice squad situation. So any further discussion on that?
Nope. I think it's just as you were saying before, having a third quarterback means you got to pull from somewhere, because typically Seattle carries two.
Fullback, Robbie Oots. He's clearly got the spot. They feel really comfortable with him. Obviously, if Brady Russell makes the roster at the tight end spot, he can also do the fullback stuff if needed. And that was one of my selections as well when we get to that point. Running back, Keith, what do you got?
Well, I went Walker, Charbonnet, and Martinez. I kept it small. That's where I rather than keeping four, I kept three in order to fit Robbie Oots in as the fullback.
I did too. Same. And we can go through practice squad stuff.
I thought you'd have Holani on there. So
yeah, even at 27, I went with three running backs.
Wow.
Because I kept 4 tight ends and 10 offensive linemen, and we can talk about that. Yeah, I did the same thing. And I have George Holani and Jacardia Wright on the practice squad as well, as one of my 15 or 16 guys that I'm protecting. Wide receiver for me was hard because I'm hearing so many good things out of training camp.
Mm-hmm.
And my intuition tells me that they want to keep 5, but my brain tells me, based on what I'm hearing, is that they would have to keep 6. And so I went with 6, Keith: Cooper Kupp, Njigba, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Jake Bobo, Torrey Horton, and Tariq Young. You may have a different one.
Same 6. Nope.
Okay.
I have the same 6.
And the reason that I kept Jake Bobo and Tariq Young, which are essentially kind of the bubble players, Torrey Horton has clearly taken the 3rd spot, by the way, on my depth chart over Valdez-Scantling. And I want to talk about that just a little bit as well. But Jake Bobo, Tariq Young, the reason I have those guys on there and I kept 6 is because they are just showing out in training camp and practice. Now, obviously, we've got a ways to go now before the final roster cut down and so forth. But at this point, they're doing enough to really demand that the team keeps them on the roster. And that's just from me. And then after you kind of react to that, maybe we can talk about Valdez-Scantling and why we're keeping 6 and not 5.
Yeah. So I would agree. Those two guys are doing everything that's being asked of them in training camp. They're both kind of showing that they've been around for a while with their experience and really kind of looking fantastic. But the other thing with those two guys is they are key special teams contributors. They're both guys with a long track record of being good on special teams. So when push came to shove, I went with those guys as the guys that were making it on the bubble instead of a guy like Ricky White for that reason.
Right. And, that brings me to my next point. It's like Valdez-Scantling he's not doing anything wrong. He's just getting beat straight up by Torrey Horton at this point for that 3rd spot. And he's taking reps. Like Torrey Horton is like 3 or 4 days in a row of being with the ones in a 3 wide receiver set, taking those reps and also showing out at practice. I mean, Mike Macdonald is raving about him, saying, a rookie's got to make at least a play a day to really show up in camp. And he's making several plays every day. And so that brings me to Scantling is he vulnerable right now as far as making this roster? And what are the pluses and minuses of that discussion?
Well, I mean, the pluses of having him is just experience and depth at a position, because if you've got JSN, Kupp, and Horton as your 3 guys that you're going to rely on all the time, well, Kupp's injury prone. And just at this stage of his career, he's older and he's been beat up quite a bit. And so you don't really have another proven body, and you are one play away from now having, like Jake Bobo out there in you 3 wide receiver sets every single down. And I don't know how comfortable you would be with that. And so that's the kind of the pro for Scantling. The negative is he got brought in to be that 3rd wide receiver. He's no longer the 3rd wide receiver. He's been kicked down. He's on a 1-year deal, and you've got younger players, cheaper players who are showing really well. And maybe you want to keep one of the guys that you've got under team control for longer. That's exactly
how I see it too.
Yeah, I see him making it at this point. The Seahawks would need during the preseason games for someone to step up and show that they belong, and they belong not just on the roster but on the field. And if they get one other player to do that, I could see Valdez-Scantling not making this team.
If he was a $10 million guy, they would be looking to move him. Like he would be a guy that they would be trying to flip for a 6th round, 7th round pick at this point, based on the fact that he's a $3 million guy, and some of that is guaranteed, not all of it. He's worth keeping around for the reasons that you stated, at least at this moment. that equation could change. You've also got considerations lower on the roster, such as Ricky White, their 7th round draft pick, who hasn't done anything wrong in the process so far. He just hasn't been able to displace anybody above him. Cody White's been hanging around a while. They like him. He likes being on the team. He's just a peripheral player at this point. He hasn't proven that he's going to dislodge anybody above him. And so that's why he's still down where he's at. Plumlee's done some things. Steven Sims is the interesting name that could be a player that forces his way onto the roster because of his special teams contributions. He's a punt returner, kick returner, currently listed by an unofficial depth chart that the team put out before the preseason games as the number 1 punt and kick returner. So that is why that he would be part of this discussion process, but he doesn't do anything for you at the receiver position on a daily basis. You're not going to keep him in place of, a younger player with more upside. I don't think just for that reason. It would be the special team stuff and the fact that he's going to return kicks and so forth. But they've also got Torrey Horton there as well and a couple other players. So we'll see. And then Tyrone Broden is the other guy that his name keeps coming up in practice because I think Jalen Milroe has a really nice connection with him. He's making plays with the 3rd team offense in practice against the 3rd team defense. So you have to keep that in mind. But he's a player that's automatically on my practice squad list. So I'm not worried about him at this point. Yeah. And so we'll see. Now, so far, Keith, you and I have had the same exact roster decisions.
Yes, but it's a tight end and wide.
Yeah, you have the
tight end and wide receiver or offensive line where I've got diverge. One less at each of those than you. And
so let's talk about that.
Yep.
So at tight end, I've got Barner, Arroyo, and I've got Saubert.
Yep.
As my 3rd guy, but I also added Brady Russell. And the only reason I added Brady Russell is not because he's going to be a massive tight end guy, but he plays 2 positions now, tight end and fullback. And they love him on special teams. And he's just a leader. He's been around the clubhouse for a while now, and he's well respected. At this moment, I wanted to put him on the roster. You could obviously, Keith, get him cut and put him on the practice squad and then have him be one of those guys that comes up, on certain game days and so forth. That's your thinking. My thinking was just go ahead and put him up there and make a decision later on, which is what I did.
Yeah, I mean, I put him on the practice squad knowing that he'll make a decision later on when somebody gets hurt and there's an injury, and you figure, okay, who do we bring up? And it doesn't have to be at the position where the injury was, and that's how guys like Brady Russell end up on the roster. And knowing that I've already kept a fullback and a 3rd quarterback and a 6th wide receiver, something had to give. And he's not, I mean, he can play fullback, but he's not the fullback. Robbie Oots is the fullback. And I don't think you keep 2. And he's not good enough at tight end to displace any of the 3 guys above him. So he's a backup and a backup at 2 positions that don't have quite as much value. I couldn't see keeping him. And so I pushed him off the roster.
It's hard because the team had him as like a team captain at on special teams last year, for quite a few different games. So he's just one of those guys to watch because it is truly a bubble guy. And it'll be interesting to see what decisions the team makes there. Now, if I would have taken him off, I would have got my count down to 26 on the offense and keeping 10 offensive linemen, and 24. It would have been a little bit more balanced, but also to your point earlier in the conversation, I would have had to have pulled a defensive player up onto the roster that was a practice squad level guy. Honestly, I mean, the depth on the defense is not a situation where I'm kicking a bunch of guys off that are going to immediately get signed by another team. Maybe Jarek Reed, and I'll talk about him later. but he's a guy that's not on my current roster that somebody may pick off just because he's part of a secondary that's really good right now. And that would be the only reason why he's not on the roster, that there's just players above him that have just kind of pushed him off. Okay, so let's talk about the offensive line. I went with 10, you went with 9. I'm interested to see which lineman is the difference maker here. So go ahead.
So we'll start with the starters. At least for the first preseason game, the starters are going to be Cross, Zabel, Oluwatimi, Bradford, and Lucas. And so I started with those 5, put them on the roster. And then for backups at tackle, Jones is kind of he's a swing tackle. He can also play guard. Gerald has been the backup at left tackle. They like him. They're developing him. Sundell gives you your backup center and guard. And then I went with Christian Haynes as the final player because he can play center and guard as well. I highlighted him when writing this out because I'm like, that could very easily be Lumen. Mm-hmm. And Haynes could end up either on an injured list to come back later, or he could be off the roster. Yeah. But I've got him on at this point. I think the team keeps trying to get him in with the starters. He doesn't seem to want to hold on to that spot, but they're giving him the opportunity. They haven't given Lumen the opportunity. So that's why I went with Haynes. I think he's above Lumen on the depth chart. And so, but that would be, to me, that's the cutoff is I don't think you keep both those guys. I think you keep one of them and you take your pick.
So that's exactly my pressure point as well. My bubble, Lumen and Haynes. Mm-hmm. I kept both, but I wrote down in my notes, I said, I kept 10 offensive linemen. They may only keep 9. Who would be out? And I wrote down Christian Haynes. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is they've given him every opportunity at this point, every single opportunity. Right guard, center. Yesterday, he changed to left guard. They had him running reps at second team left guard. And the team may just say, listen, we've given him every opportunity. He's not able to take a job. And at this point, we've got to make some roster decisions. Do we like Lumen, who was taking second team right guard reps yesterday? Do we like him better than Christian Haynes in this offense? And if they're going to carry 9 guys, Christian Haynes' job is definitely on the line. If they keep 10, I think he's in. If they keep 9, I think he's the odd man out. And they try to get him to the practice squad. And I don't know if you're going to keep a 3rd round draft pick on the practice squad, and some other team might swoop in and get him. But they make that decision, and that's one of the hardest decisions on this whole construction for me.
Yeah,
but I kept him for now. Yeah,
that was the pressure point. It was Haynes and Lumen, and I was a little disappointed that a guy like Bryce Cabledew didn't even end up as a consideration, because I feel like he's the 11th offensive lineman and he's a draft pick. So that's kind of disappointing, but it goes to show you that they've got a lot of guys on the offensive line. They don't have a lot of high end talent, but they've got good depth instead. And that's kind of what you were talking about earlier. Like the depth on the offense is pretty solid. It's just the lack of, top end talent in front of it. That is why it's not thought of as being a good unit. But the depth is there. Whereas on the defense, it's the other way around. You've got the high end talent. You've got like the Pro Bowlers and that, but then you've got very little depth behind them. So
agreed.
It's an interesting roster at this moment.
I've got like Falalo making the practice squad, Bryce Cabledew and Mason Richmond on the practice squad as well. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that those guys can't make it, those draft picks, Cabledew and Richmond, but I think those guys get through and we develop them, continue to develop them. And then Oluwatimi at center, Jalen Sundell, as the backup. Jalen Sundell is kind of the swing, offensive lineman can really line up almost anywhere in a pinch, which is a good thing for him. Okay, let's talk defense. So you ended up with 25 on offense. I ended up with 27. The differences was I kept an extra tight end and an extra offensive lineman. Let's see how that changes. You have 25 on defense. I ended up with 23.
Yeah, 25
so
on.
I'm very curious to see how we changed.
On defense was a challenge because it became, okay, I was like you, I've got 23. And then I'm like, but who else on here is deserving? And it was hard to find guys, and I went with special teams contributors. So
okay,
that's really working.
So defensive tackle, I've got truly inside guys, nose tackle guys. I've got 3: Murphy, Hankins, Peely. Something could happen there with Hankins. He hasn't practiced yet. He's got a back. Coach said yesterday that he's close in a day or two. So we'll see if he shows up next week. He's not going to play in this game, but we'll see if he shows up in practice next week. And then he makes the roster, I think, just because of default in essence. And Peely there because he's the favored guy taking first team reps currently because Hankins just isn't there. And then Bahana, Campbell, Singleton, Bubba Thomas at the tail end there. Those guys are my practice squad candidates. Bahana you could argue could be the 4th guy there. I just went with 3 because that's just the way it ended up for me. And then Reed, Williams, Morris, and Ivy make this roster. Jared Ivy is the big story there. But overall, I've got 7 guys on the defensive line.
Yeah, I've got the same group, and so I grouped them differently because I just put all the defensive line together, and so I'm just kind of like scrolling through, making sure I didn't miss someone. But yeah, it was Peely and Ivy were the guys that I think were kind of maybe people aren't going to know about. Mike Morris making this roster at this point is kind of a surprise. Not that he hasn't done great things in camp, because he's earned that spot, but we've seen him for a couple of years, including last year where he was available and just couldn't get on the field. He was a healthy scratch in some games. But he seems to have taken a big step forward this offseason. So yeah, I've got the same 7 guys. And
that puts Riley Mills, their draft pick this year, on the injured reserve list to start the season, which is totally makes sense. And we had, that's the plan anyway.
That was the plan when he got drafted.
Let's talk about the edge group. This is the hardest group for me. And in fact, before we had a conversation, I was, I needed to add a player onto my list, and I chose a player out of this group only because I needed to add a player. But I've got top 3 are DeMarcus Lawrence, Boye, Mafe, Derek Hall. Nwoso I've got on the injured reserve list to start the season. He could come back early. He's going to have to be ready to go like a week before the season if the team is going to make that decision. And I don't know that he's going to be ready. And so I've just left him off for now.
His leg is still wrapped. And he's not he's not walking on it. He's not close. So he's on the injured list at the beginning of the year unless something just absolutely miraculous happens.
So after Hall, we've got a choice between Jamie Sheriff, who I have playing 2 positions. So he's an off the ball linebacker, but they have him playing some rush stuff. So I put him on this list. Tariq Smith, Connor O'Toole, Seth Coleman, Jalen Gaines. I've heard some good things about Seth Coleman and Jalen Gaines, a couple undrafted guys. But Jamie Sheriff's been in camp for a year now, and they really like him to the point where they're trying to give him opportunities to figure out where he could fit in on that defense. And based on the idea that he can play a couple different positions for them, That's the other guy I put on my list.
Yeah, he was the other guy I put on the list too. For a lot of those same reasons. I mean, he warms up with the middle linebackers and that kind of stuff, but when they actually get out onto the defense, he does a lot of edge rushing in camp. And so I went ahead and put him in with the edge rushers, but knowing that he gives you some versatility. He was my fourth, which is that's a position where, especially if Nwoso had been healthy, you look at it and you go, oh, they're really solid there, but what they don't have is depth. So
this could definitely be one of those position groups that they look outside of this current roster for.
Yes, absolutely. I could absolutely see them watch for some sort of salary cap casualty and then swoop in and grab, someone that they can have.
Or another fringy guy on a roster they're trying to sneak through. Like, we ended up with Drake Thomas a couple of years ago, surprise cut of the Raiders. And you look for a guy like that because you're looking for a guy that's probably not going to play, but just in case. And so we'll see how that goes. Okay. So far we're aligned. And then inside linebackers, really, I've got 3, and then Jamie Sheriff can play that spot if necessary. So you can kind of count him as a 4th. I've got Ernest Jones, Tyrese Knight, Drake Thomas.
Yeah, this was a hard point because I did not like that one bit because of lack of depth, but also linebackers are good special teams players because they can tackle and run. And so I kept Patrick O'Connell as a 4th inside linebacker.
Okay. They like Josh Ross as well.
They do.
And may even like him better. I just don't know for sure. I mean, Josh Ross shows up on special teams a lot. And that's kind of his thing.
It was the choice between those two. And I just, essentially it was a coin flip. We're talking very back of the roster. This is probably the 52nd player on the 53-man roster.
Or the 53rd. Yeah. I wrote in my notes, I said, if you go with five wide receivers instead of 6 and 9 offensive linemen instead of 10, who would you keep on defense instead? I wrote that in my notes. I was like, defensive tackle Bohanna, one of the edge players, linebacker Josh Ross or Jamie Sharif, a 6th cornerback. Like, I literally was like, what am I going to do with that? Like, there's not a bunch of players on defense that I would want to elevate and kick somebody off on the offensive side. So that's why I kept my 27 instead of trying to equalize the roster, because at this moment, there's just nobody on defense I would just hand a job to over kicking off like a Christian Haynes or Lumen onto the practice squad and trying to sneak them through or whatever, or Brady Russell. I'd rather have those guys because they just contribute to the team. And I think make the whole team better. These guys on the back end that I'm talking about, I just don't know. So anyway, okay. So you added Patrick O'Connell. You made your inside linebackers 4 instead of my 3. Let's talk about the safeties.
Yeah. So Love, Bryant, Emanwari are their guys are going to be on the field a lot.
For sure.
D'Anthony Bell is a guy that is showing up in practice and, can play special teams. Those 4, I think, are all locks to make this roster at this point. And then I went ahead and added a 5th. Jarek Reed is a guy that has been around the team, been around the roster, but has struggled with injury. But they also brought in AJ Finley this offseason as a special teams guy. And I gave
bad news
AJ
for
Finley
you.
the nod. What?
Yeah, I have really bad news for you.
What's
yesterday in practice, AJ Finley went down and he has got an ACL. He's out for the year. He's on the injured reserve list.
I did not know that. So we'll go with Jarek Reed. Because it was really, again, it was just like the Ross O'Connell spot where I was like, it's going to be one or the other. Just pick one. With safety, it was going to be Finley or Reed, and it was one or the other. Just pick one. I'll go with Reed then.
Yeah.
Which actually I feel a little better about, because I really don't want Reed off the roster. But
yes,
he also wasn't drafted by the current coaches, so yeah, we'll go with Jarek Reed. But I went with 5. I know that you look at that and you go, it's probably easier to take 4, but I wanted the special teams abilities that safeties bring.
I will say this, during the draft, Carl Scott, our defensive backs coach, was with the team when Jarek Reed was drafted, and he pounded the table for him. Mm-hmm. He's the guy that pounded the table that got Jarek Reed drafted by this team. And so he's still his position coach. So that does kind of give him a little bit of an inside track, but he hasn't really done anything. Like, he was injured his first year. He's kind of recovered, injured, kind of not full speed his second season. This year, he just really hasn't stepped up and kicked anybody up. In fact, DeAnthony Bell is outplaying him at a position where I think they want more depth, which is this more of a strong safety kind of guy. Jarek Reed is more of a free safety nickel back. And so it really depends on how they view that roster construction, what they do at the cornerback room as well. Guys that can kind of play nickel and slot guys. Yeah, I just went with 4. DeAnthony Bell being the 4th. And Jarek Reed hopefully getting into the practice squad along with Ty Okada. And then AJ Finley's on the injured reserve now. Unfortunately, that's happens, and it's tough. Cornerbacks, I kept 5.
I also kept 5, and I've got a surprise, I think, in this 5. So we'll see. We'll see what happens as we.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that back end guy. Mm-hmm. The number 5 guy that I've got could also be any number of other guys. So I'm going to see who you chose. So I've got Woolen, Witherspoon, Job, Griffin, Shaquille Griffin. Now he's only played in one practice. He's only practiced one day so far since we signed him, but he is back in the fold now. We'll see how that goes. He's definitely going to be a great depth piece and a contributor. So I'm counting on him being on the 53 right now. Mm-hmm. And then Shermar Jean-Charles for me is that 5th guy. They brought him in as a free agent. He's great on special teams. Haven't heard anything about him in camp, really. Just a kind of a no name. Hasn't popped. And there's a couple other guys below him, not Pritchett, by the way. I've got him cut, maybe making the practice squad, but Williams, Cam Alexander, Isis Waxter have been popping in camp. And I could have switched Waxter. Yeah, me too. Isis
Waxter in there because he has been. Now he's gotten beat deep a couple times, which is never good. But he's also flashed some major potential, and they like his size, and he's so physical as a tackler. At one point during really early on after the draft, you were talking about, well, maybe they're going to move him to safety because he plays so physical. He would make a good safety. And so, but that's something that Macdonald wants. He wants his defensive backs to be really physical, and Waxter plays that way. And so that's where I gave him the nod. I think that he's a guy that's shown really well, and I went as my 5th corner.
So essentially you went one more off the ball linebacker and an additional safety. And I went one more tight end / special teams player and one more offensive lineman that I didn't want to kick off the roster. So I went 10 offensive linemen, 4 tight ends. You went with 4 inside linebackers, 5 safeties.
Yep.
And that's the difference in our entire prediction. That's interesting to me. What do you think? What are your thoughts? And is there one player that's not on your 53 that you wish you had back now that you made your prediction?
Lumen, the guard. He's the guy that he was hard to cut. He was really hard to cut. But I needed I needed a roster spot to keep Jalen Milroe. Now to keep Robbie Oots, to me, by not having that fourth tight end, that one was fine. But in order to get a third quarterback on the roster, I had to lose it somewhere. And rather than taking it from the defense, I took it from the offensive line, and it became Lumen. And that is a challenge because I'm not sure he makes it through to the practice squad. Christian Haynes could very well be that same person who doesn't make it and struggle. Doesn't get through to the practice squad. So take your pick there. That was the spot that really was hard to cut, to the point where I very much considered going 26-24 as my split and keeping Lumea and dropping Patrick O'Connell, knowing that you've got Jamie Sheriff that can play inside linebacker in a pinch. And he essentially becomes your fourth inside linebacker and your fourth outside linebacker. At that point, having him do both. And so, but that was the same. I don't like that lack of depth, especially at a position where those guys tend to be special teams mainstays. So I went ahead and kept O'Connell. It's hard. That's a hard choice.
I understand the pressure to balance the roster to get 25 and 25. But I had no misgivings at the end of my exercise or pressure to add another defensive player to create more and eliminate an offensive player to create more balance. It's like I felt like I'm putting the best 53 on the field, and that's just the way it ends up. And it's not so imbalanced, 27-24, 23, right? 27, 23. It's not so out of whack that they're going to make changes. Things are changing and guys will be brought up and changed. So it's not so far out of whack that they can't make it work. And they protected the guys that they needed to protect on everyone's cut down day in the NFL, which is the day that you're most susceptible to getting somebody picked off. And so that was my overarching idea. Was I protected the players I wanted to protect. I kept the best 53, regardless of position or offense or defense, and then adjustments will be made into the future. I agree with you on almost every point across the entire exercise here, down to Isis Waxter over Charles. The only tipping point for me on Charles was special teams and veteran presence there in that room. And, but Isis Waxter is also outperforming him on the field in practice. And so it really depends on whether or not the coaching staff feels like that's a guy we can't expose to the practice squad. And he's better for our team long-term, and we're going to keep him. So that'll be interesting to watch. And they did keep him over the other. I can't remember the other corner's name earlier in the off season here that they brought in as an undrafted guy that ended up getting cut. And it was one of those players that was coveted right after undrafted free agent signing started happening. He was a guy that was high on everyone's list. I can't remember his name now. Yeah, interesting exercise. How do you feel about the roster? I'm like you. I feel like the depth on offense is quite amazing, considering the offense seemed like it's the weakness of this team. It's sneaky. One of the strengths now, I think, is just the sheer depth on offense. And if the offensive starters are good, like this team could be really solid on the offensive side of the ball this year.
The offense is deep. I wouldn't say it's good, because you could be better at pretty much every position. But there's fantastic depth. If Olu gets hurt and you got to bring Sundell in, is that a huge drop off? Not really. And that's the kind of thing. And so if Walker can't go and you got to play Charbonnet, is that's not, I mean, that's not going to hurt you that much because Charbonnet is a great player. There's a lot of depth. But I think the high end talent, you've got a middle of the road quarterback. You've got, other than JSN, you've got an old Cooper Kupp and a rookie in Horton who is still trying to figure stuff out on the offensive line. You've got a couple of tackles and a guard that you like, but the guard's a rookie. And then you got two guys on there that you don't really like at all. So having depth there behind them is great, but the depth isn't good enough to get on the field when you've got a guy like Bradford as your starter. Is it really that deep? So yeah. Like I said, there's depth, but there's not the high end talent. On the defense, it's the other way around. You've got the makings of a top 5 defense. I mean, the bones here of the top 14 players on defense are fantastic. And after that, though, it drops off real fast.
If there was one single person on defense you couldn't afford to have injured, where you would lose games, you would worry you would lose games because they were missed, who would it be?
Williams. Defensive line.
Yeah, you could just say Ernest Jones as well, but yeah, for sure.
I mean, Ernest Jones.
One of the if you lose an edge player, you're down to 2 starters. You have no rotation. That could be a problem for you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's any of the edge players because of that reason, because there's just just isn't anything behind them. Williams, for me, it's more the high end. I guess you'd move Murphy over into Williams' spot and bring a guy like Peely in as the starting nose and be okay, but I wouldn't love it. But yeah, and then Ernest Jones, because you're going to bring in Drake Thomas and expect that to work. We saw how important Jones was last year.
This entire season and the success of the defense rides on 3 players: Leonard Williams, DeMarcus Lawrence, I think, and the health of those players, and Ernest Jones. If those players stay healthy all year, I think we're solid. We're gold. If one of those players ends up significantly out for a minute, there's just not enough depth there, I think, to replace them at any adequate level. And so you're going to see a fall off a little bit. And how much of that fall off, from a top 5 defense, maybe you're now top 10. Maybe it's not enough to make a huge impact on most games, but
I think that you can work around a little. Like I said, you could work around a little of it with, like with Williams. What I was saying, you just move Murphy over and bring a guy like Peely in.
Yes.
If it's Ernest Jones, you move Tyrese Knight over, and then maybe you just play the nickel, always, and you let Emanwari be on the field and not to be a rotational situation. You don't no longer have to work to find ways to get him on the field. He's just there, and you just play the nickel because you don't really have a middle linebacker.
And you hope Nwoso is available after like week 8.
Yeah.
That's and Riley Mills the same. Riley would still need a lot of work and practice, and he may end up being available, but I don't think he's going to have an impact this year. No. I agree with your assessment on the offense too. It's like we're good, but we're not great, and I think that's okay. It's okay to have a good but not great position, an offense with the defense that we have. It's like I love the kind of the vision that Mike Macdonald has on this offense and what they did to address it in the offseason. They brought in the coordinator that he wanted, running the scheme that he wanted. They have the players that they want to run that scheme now, including Sam Darnold, who I think will do fine. In fact, he has an opportunity to actually be better for me, a more well-rounded, all over the place, better quarterback than he was at Minnesota. And let me say what I mean. Not that the guy in Minnesota was a guy that had some offensive weapons that we just don't have, with Jefferson and a couple other players there at wide receiver. And he stretched the field a lot, and they were able to protect enough or give him time to throw the ball down the field. And that's his strength and so forth. But one of his other strengths is, in my opinion, is kind of being a point guard type quarterback, getting the ball to his offensive weapons and kind of letting them make plays, dumping off when he needs to, getting the ball out quickly. He's got those abilities. And I think Sam Darnold ends up being a more efficient quarterback. And this offense is actually underrated a little bit for me. If the offensive line ends up being decent, like top 15 decent, not number one offensive line in the NFL, and the running game works, and Sam's throwing the ball around, spreading it out, and the Jalen Milroe experiment comes in and is effective on making teams defend another weapon, this team could really easily be top 15 overall offense in time of possession, third down conversions, red zone conversions, scoring. And when you have a number one defense or top five, that's good enough, I think, to get them into the playoffs and win a game and be scary. Because they do have the ability to throw the ball down the field. They do have the weapons. And if Kenneth Walker stays healthy and is available all year and they make the playoffs, there's not another team that would want to face them.
No, not when you got a defense that's good. You got a top five defense, and then you've got an offense that might not be explosive. I mean, it can be. You got Horton and Scantling and guys that can get deep, but overall, this is not we're just going to beat you in one play every time we get the ball type of situation. They're going to be efficient. They're going to move the ball. They're going to be methodical. They're going to eat the clock. They're going to piss you off by not letting your offense get on the field. And you combine that with the top defense, and you've got a team that can win a lot of games. And they've got to make that happen.
The wild cards for me on the offense are Elijah Arroyo and Torrey Horton. Two rookies, haven't stepped on the football field yet, but we're hearing so many good things about them in camp, which you don't hear normally about rookies. They are really elevated to the point where they're pushing veterans out of the way so that they get on the field. They're demanding that they get time and reps with the number one offense and so forth. Those guys could have a seriously oversized impact on how this team performs. And we may be undervaluing that initially, just because we haven't seen it. But a guy like Arroyo could be a weapon that is just waiting to burst out onto the scene. And all of a sudden we've got a guy that's going to catch 45 balls this year that we aren't even counting on really yet. And a guy that's got, maybe 14, 15 yards per reception out there that can really stretch the field, and he's going to line up in all sorts of different positions. So for me, those guys are just tantalizing as far as guys we don't even know what we don't know yet, because they're there, but you can't really factor them in yet. And if it works, I think that takes the offense even further than we even realize.
Yeah.
One of the surprise guys for me, and we can kind of wrap it up. There's two surprise guys making the roster for me. Jared Ivey and D'Anthony Bell. Jared Ivey's a great story.
Is not to me, that's not a surprise.
Well, it's not a surprise, but we didn't know about him until he showed up here. And just the fact that he's emerged and he's already instrumental for me is just a really positive development. And then Jared Ivey, kind of shows up and just is so consistent and such a bull there on the outside, and the body type that he has to set the edge. And that's a good surprise for me.
Yeah. For me, the surprises are a guy like Isis Waxter making the roster. That's really kind of that. And then you got to look at Christian Haynes being a bubble player.
Yeah.
That's a surprise because he's a guy that, was fully expected to step up and take that job. And for the second year in a row, he hasn't been able to.
To the point where they just move him. They don't even keep him in one spot to keep pushing. They're moving him around all over the place because one of two reasons. They really want to see him on all over the place, and maybe he can take a job here or there or whatever, and just giving him an opportunity to be like everything to them. Or they just can't figure out like what his deal is. And we'll try him over here. Maybe he's a better left side guy than he is a right side guy.
I think what you're looking at this point is they're just prepping him for his role in this offense, which is going to be a backup, and you need your backups to be able to play multiple positions, because you're not just going to have a backup right guard that doesn't do anything else. You better be able to play right guard, left guard, and in a pinch play center. So you very rarely have a backup tackle that just plays left tackle. They usually have to be able to play both sides and sometimes be okay moving inside to guard. And they just seem to be prepping Haynes for the backup role. Like he could not beat out a guy that is highly beatable. And that's very disappointing.
It is. In good news, Charles Cross had a surgery on his dislocated finger, and it was multiple times he had dislocation. I had the same thing when I was in high school. I ended up dislocating my finger like 8, 9, 10 times to the point where I could bend it around in a backward circle. Not to be too gross and graphic, but I had lost all my ligaments in there. It was just, I had to have surgery. And I had this big, huge cast, like it was like this big around my arm, and it's crazy. And I wouldn't have been able to play it. I'd had it during the off season, but according to reports, Charles Cross was going to be out until roughly, first game. He was going to be out all preseason. He shows up like the day after surgery or 2 days after surgery and practices with the team again, doing all the drills, nothing held back. And I looked at his hand, and he's just got gloves on. He doesn't even have a cast or anything. And
he's got a splint in order to keep the finger immobilized, but it's not preventing him from doing anything. I mean, he was out there with the finger that was dislocating, all the time, and was out there practicing, and was ready to just roll with it. And the team was like, let's get this fixed. It's not a big deal, and you'll be ready to go. And so he went and got it fixed, and then he's like, yeah, it's not a big deal. I'm at least going to get out and practice. We won't see him in a preseason game. No. We probably weren't going to see him in his preseason game even without the finger thing, but with it guaranteed, we won't see him in a preseason game, but he'll be ready to go week 1. But the fact that he's practicing and he's not like just completely out is good, because it's allowing him to continue to work and continue to
and shows the leadership.
Work with Gray Zabel beside him, and who's a rookie, and they need to work on their communication and all that kind of stuff. So it's great to see. Yeah.
So I'm going to be off for a minute, and then we'll come back next week, and we'll talk about what we saw for the game that's going to be Thursday night against the Raiders at home, Lumen Field. I'm anxious to find out how the team is going to perform, and also see Pete Carroll back on the sidelines coaching will be a feel-good story for me, even if it's just a preseason game. And then Jaxon-smith back here as well. I would imagine they're going to run a couple series and then he'll be out anyway. But the game is meaningless. I just want to see our players execute as a team. And that'll be fun. So anyway, until next time, you can find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. You can find me at NWC Hawk. The show is where it's at. You guys all know how to find us. And when you get there, though, subscribe. Make sure you subscribe. I think like 70% of our views on YouTube are from outside subscriptions. So if you subscribe, you get them every week and you get notification. And so until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NWCHawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.